The wall-to-wall coverage, which has basically existed for the last 48 hours over this guy who's lost, 7 elections, and who has views which are pretty repugnant, is just bizarre. We need to be willing to take it head on. We can't just shy away. You can't just be like, oh yeah, well, in order to soften the blow, what we'll do is we'll also speak ill of migrants. No, that's not how you deal with populism. You take it head on and you say, these are our principles. This is the right thing to do, and that's why we're going to argue these points, and we're going to take it to the public, and we're going to be compelling about it, and we're going to offer them hope and optimism for the future rather than just trying to scapegoat others. And that's the challenge that faces all political parties of the centre, but certainly those like ourselves of the centre left, to be able to take that head on and to not cow to the populist dogma that exists.
Stephen Flynn, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for asking me first. I'm usually the one who kicks that off. Yeah,
I like to be polite.
Yeah, good. I like that about you. How are you?
I'm good. We're in the midst of a campaign, but the weather's been good. It's been nice weather. Responses on the doors have been fantastic.
Have they?
Warm responses to match the weather, yes. The old Twitter cliches.
Been knocking the doors, pounding the streets.
Pounding the streets, knocking the doors, delivering the leaflets.
Yeah.
Speaking to little children and dogs and
kissing
everything.
Babies.
You're kissing babies.
Shaking hands. Great work.
It's been really good fun so far. And we've got about 30 days to go.
Yep.
Think of all the fun we can have.
So many more babies to kiss, so many more hands to shake. Let's start off with last night, actually. Leeds debate on STV. How do you think it went?
I thought you were actually going to say Scotland versus Gibraltar there for a second.
We can start with that if you want to.
It was only 2-0. It's quite embarrassing. No, Leaders debate. I thought it was as expected. John is John. John is great politician, great man, serious man for serious times, knows his stuff. And all the opposition parties trying to have a pop at the SNP, even though it's a Westminster election. But no, I think John equipped himself as well as I was expecting him to do so, as the best politician in Scotland, the most popular politician in Scotland as well, I see. And yeah, we've got a fair contest on our hands in the next 30 days.
Do you think that's quite a unique perspective? A lot of the consensus was that Anas Sarwar came out top of that contest.
Who said that? Have you been?
I've been paying attention to what they're saying in Scotland, Stephen.
All the Labour Party folk were saying that. No, I thought John was fantastic. I got down last night, very late last night, so watched it after everyone else
on catch up,
man, and I thought he did exceptionally well. You know, it's a weird dynamic. So obviously we're in a Westminster election contest, and all focus is very much on who's going to be the next Prime Minister. What's the policies of Sunak? What's the policies of Starmer? Is there a difference? Is there not? And of course, meantime, when you're doing TV shows back in Scotland, John's the First Minister of Scotland. So he's getting quizzed about devolved issues rather than the issues in Westminster. So that can change the dynamic slightly. But no, it definitely held his own. And there's a reason John's First Minister, because he's, as I say, the best politician in Scotland. And I thought he excelled himself.
Is that the reason why he's the First Minister in Scotland? I think it might have something to do with Hamza Yusuf, doesn't it?
Oh no, John, the cream always rises to the top. Cometh the hour, cometh the man.
Stop.
Let's what other cliches have we got in here? It was John's time to come to the fore. He stepped up. We needed him to do so. Him and Kate are now in charge, and I think we've got 30 days to make sure the public are as pleased about that as I am.
I was watching the kind of they do the sort of the cross question bit, right? Colin does his little starter, and then he lets all the leaders ask each other questions. And I was struck by Anas Sarwar, and it came across to me like he was filibustering. Like he was just, when John was questioning, when Douglas Ross was questioning him, he was just filling the time. I don't know if you noticed that, whether it was just me.
Yeah. No, I thought, totally. I mean, it's a pretty well-worn tactic, and if you can get away with it, you might as well try and do it, because I mean, he was getting pinned on the biggest issue of the moment, which is the fact that the Tories and the Labour Party have got the same fiscal rules, for want of a better term. £18 billion of public sector cuts are coming down the line. What does that look like? What's the consequence of that? How do you mitigate it? I think Anas's response was, I don't accept that, and then just waffled beyond that. Well, like, that's Rachel Reeves who's saying that. Like, I mean, she's going to be in charge in 30, 40 days. days. What she says kind of matters. And she said that they're going to match the Tory fiscal plan. She says there's not going to be an emergency budget. So he should be being honest with the public about what the consequences of that is going to be, because it's going to be all the things that we rely on, including, of course, our NHS. And I don't think in an election campaign it's good enough to just step away from these issues. I think you've got to meet them head on, and they've got to explain why that matters to them. As the SNP, we're pretty clear we believe in investment in public sector. We believe that the fiscal straitjacket should be coming off. There are other parties, the main parties in Westminster don't, and there's going to be consequences for all of us as a result of that.
I do want to talk about that and perceived or real consensus between Labour and Tories. You said there, though, Labour are going to be the government. Do you think it's a foregone conclusion, this election?
I think it's really, really difficult for anyone to argue otherwise. The poll numbers put Labour, 150, 200 seat majority.
It varies, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and they've not changed. They've been consistent for months. The Tories have been coming out with all these mad policies over recent weeks, almost a new policy on a daily basis. The one that sticks in everyone's mind, of course, is the national service stuff. But it's not making any change. And I mean, they've got a TV debate that's coming up, but we know Sunak's not very good at them. I mean, he lost to Liz Truss on the TV debate, so like I don't think he's going to manage to sway the public much. If he couldn't even sway his own members not to back Liz Truss over him. So look, it's one of those where it looks like Labour will form the government, and because of that, we should be scrutinising what they plan to do. We should be holding up a mirror so that they can see what the consequences of that's going to be. And then we've got to let the public decide in a Scottish context whether they want to go down that route or whether they want to take the better option, which in my view is the SNP.
That YouGov poll last night, which is one of the MRP polls that I think they had Labour like 190 or something like that. So within that range of polling. You look at Scotland, the SNP are retreating to the Highlands, Central Belt's gone to Labour, farmers in the borders all Tory. So do you accept that that's what's going to happen in Scotland?
I think what the polling showed yesterday, because there was two big MRPs poll that came out. There was the Redfield Winton one, and there was a YouGov one, and we varied between 17 seats and 35 seats. And what that shows us is that there's all to play for, and it's all to play for in the Central Belt. And the margins that sit around those seats in the Central Belt is so small. And for folk there, I mean, there's an understandable desire. I mean, I get it. I want the Tories out of power like everyone else. There's an understandable desire to say we want change. We want to change a government. I mean, who wouldn't? But it's what that change looks like that matters. If it's going to be more austerity cuts, if it's going to be privatisation of the NHS, if it's going to be continuing with the policies of Brexit, no closer relationship in the single market or freedom of movement, walking away from commitments on net zero, how much of a change actually is that? And in that context, in that Westminster context, do you not therefore want MPs who will go down and always put Scotland's interests first, which is what the SNP will do? I mean, that's our USP as we're unashamed about it. So I guess for a whole host of people in that Central Belt constituency area, that's the question which is going to be at the forefront of their minds in the coming weeks. And it's for us to inspire them to want to vote for the SNP because of the policy platform that we stand on, and we're clear about our values. Our values don't change. They don't alter on the basis of what the Tories are doing or what Nigel Farage might or might not want to happen. We're pretty firm in being pro-European, pro-investment in public sector, pro-Scotland having a choice over its own future, of course. And that's in stark contrast to the Westminster status quo. Stability, as Keir Starmer calls it, well, stability is cuts. Stability is Brexit.
Stability is change, Rachel Reeves said the other day.
I mean, that's worse cliches than the ones I was pulling out earlier, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's uninspiring stuff. It's dull and duller between Sunak and Starmer. We can do better. We must do better. Surely broken Brexit Britain isn't as good as it gets. And we can be that strong voice for Scotland. We can put forward what we believe in. And if we're not down there doing that, nobody's going to be down there doing that. Particularly if Labour are cutting around with 150 to 200 seat majority, because that Parliament will just flow. And opposition from the Scottish National Party can be a good thing. We've been pretty effective so far.
You mentioned net zero there. Pretty important for the SNP.
Massively important, massively important.
Will the SNP commit to no new oil and gas in the North Sea?
So the important thing here, and this is a reductive argument, right? Our starting point. The important thing here is the fact that we want to hit net zero. I want to hit net zero as quickly as possible. So that's onshore wind with the SNP miles ahead of everyone else. Scotland since 2007 in terms of onshore wind has delivered a capacity which is far in excess of anywhere else on these isles. And now the rest of the UK is trying to catch up because the NIMBYism stopped it. In Scotland, we went ahead and did it. So onshore wind, offshore wind, hydro pump storage, there's a couple of projects that are waiting to come on stream. Tidal, where we've got world-leading technology, carbon capture and storage, where we've got a huge basin to be there, and obviously that green hydrogen development into Europe as well. I want to see that happen. I want to see it happen for two reasons. Firstly, because it's absolutely essential to combat climate change, but secondly, it's the only way we're going to have economic prosperity going forward. The important thing, though, is you need people to do that, and you need skilled workers in order to deliver that. And it's the people in the northeast of Scotland who work in the energy sector as it stands who are the ones who can deliver that change. If you have an immediate switch off, as it's being suggested by some, then what happens is those people will go and work elsewhere. I mean, I see them. They already do it. I've got family members who work abroad in the energy sector. There's folk who work in Brazil and Africa, and of course in the Middle East. So if you lose that workforce, you ain't ever hitting net zero. And if you are, all you're doing it is based upon imports. And that doesn't benefit anyone. It doesn't mean that we've got jobs in Scotland. It doesn't mean our economy is doing good in Scotland. And ultimately it limits our ability to meet our climate targets. So yeah, fully committed to net zero. But the discussion in and around, do you stop things right now? Of course you don't stop things right now, because if you do that, then you can't deliver net zero. And it's a much more nuanced conversation than what folk are having. Because people obviously in politics right now drive straight to, is it a yes, no? And the reality is that we're in the position of saying, we want to do this, we will do this. And the only way to do it is to take people with us, because they're the ones who can deliver.
I guess the yes, no question comes from, it's not a cliff edge. If you continue what's already been granted, the extraction that's already happening, you're tailing it off. The yes, no is, do we continue to expand? Do we go for a place like Rosebank? Do we go for...
So the thing there is it's the same premise, because the people who work in the industry now, who are the ones who deliver net zero, I mean, they're the folk who are going to develop the tech for carbon capture and storage, or for transporting green hydrogen, which is what is going to fuel Europe for the decades to come. They are the ones who do that. If you say that there's no new projects for them to work on, they will go and work in Brazil. They will go and work in the Middle East, and we lose them. And we lose the ability to hit net zero. And then Aberdeen in 30, 40 years perhaps looks like Detroit or something, because all industry is gone. I can't sit and allow that to happen, because I don't think that allows you to meet the climate targets we need to. And you know, I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at home, and it's probably the one thing that worries me the most is, what is this planet going to look like when they're my age and older? And we need to make sure we get this right. You don't get it right by simply flicking a switch. You have to make sure you have what we call a just transition. So we've put £500 million into a fund to try and develop this and to make it happen. Most of the energy policies sit in London, though, and they have consistently failed. I mean, the Tories have decided they don't want net zero. They think that oil and gas will last forever. It won't. It's a false hope. It's a false promise, and it belies the evidence of climate change. And the Labour Party are talking about setting up a company which is a total sham. I mean, man, it doesn't generate electricity. GB Energy. Yep. Keir Starmer was on the radio in Scotland the other day. It doesn't generate electricity. It doesn't sell electricity, and it doesn't own any infrastructure. All it's going to be is a finance arm for the private sector. And that's not change. That's primarily what government does out of the departments that are there at the moment. So we can do better, we must do better. But I think Scotland's energy should be in Scotland's hands in that regard. So we get this right for everyone. We get it right for the economy, we get it right for jobs, but most important perhaps, we get it right for the planet, because we can't afford to make a mistake on this.
Can I invite you to sort of engage with Labour's proposals for nationalisation at the moment, because they're putting forward a similar kind of idea, right, in relation to the rail companies, that there's a sort of umbrella public organisation, but the operators underneath, the rolling stock companies underneath, remain in private hands. I mean, do you view what they're proposing as nationalisation, as public ownership?
I think Labour need to be challenged to go further. Of course, the railways in Scotland are nationalised by the Scottish National Party. Our water, I hate to break this to everyone in England.
Drink Scottish tap water.
Drink Scottish tap water. It is seriously good. And it's a nationalised company because we kept it in public ownership, and what a difference that's made. I think we can and we must challenge them to go further. I mean, ScotRail, all rail companies face challenges, primarily to do with the tracks, and Network Rail is of course separate from the rolling stock that sits on it, and that can often impact upon times. But the nationalised rail service in Scotland has got one of the best performing services in the entire UK, and we've just capped peak rail fares as well. So we've shown the model of how you can do things and do things well. It's now for the Westminster parties to decide whether they want to copy that. Hopefully they will, and I think that benefits everyone. It benefits folk down in England and Wales, and it means that perhaps we've got a little bit more money to spend on our public transport back home as well.
You're proud of the SNP's record on transport?
I'm proud of huge chunks of it, absolutely. I mean, if you're under the age of 22 right now in Scotland, you get a free bus pass. If you're an old person, you get a free bus pass. If you want to go on the trains, like I say, they're on a nationalised service with peak fares capped. We built the Queensferry Crossing. We developed the Aberdeen Western Peripheral Route, which runs around the city that I represent, which has been dramatic change, something that was promised for decades and never happened despite the oil wealth that sat up in the northeast of Scotland. The Borders Railway, we reintroduced that. Everyone was saying not to do it. The SNP stepped up to the plate and did it. We just opened Leavenmouth railway station in Fife the other day for the first time, I think it was, in 40 or 50 years. Reopened it, rebuilt it, trying to encourage people back into public transport, because that's, of course, one of the ways that you combat the climate emergency, and you make it easier for folk to get around in an affordable way. It's a good thing. We're doing good stuff.
What chunks of it aren't you proud of?
Was that what I said? Was that what I wanted to?
They said there are chunks that you're proud of, yeah.
Most of it, the vast majority of it, I'm proud of it.
Ferries are painted on windows.
The ferries is a different story. I don't think anyone would try and pretend that that's not been a pretty challenging set of circumstances. The important thing here, though, is right with the ferries. The ferries have been very challenging. The important thing is, though, what we did when we invested in that yard was make sure that yard didn't disappear, because for decades, Scotland's industry disappeared. We've seen it as a consequence of Thatcher. We didn't see the Labour government under Tony Blair do anything to stem that tide. The SNP stepped in to save 300-400 jobs, key manufacturing jobs on the Clyde. And that was a big call to make at the time. Has everything been perfect since then? Of course it's not been perfect, everyone knows that. But was it the right decision to make? Yeah, of course it was. And hopefully we can get to a point where that yard is able to deliver for the future as well. Now that's going to be challenging, everyone knows the commentary and around that. But I hope we can get there, because it was the right thing to do. And anyone who says otherwise isn't grasping the importance of shipbuilding in that part of Scotland.
I think Swinney put a smiling face on it yesterday as well, talking about other routes. And something, he was sort of saying another 6 ferries or something. I can't remember what his line was exactly, but deflected, I think.
He'll know more about that than I
suspect so, yeah. Another area of the SNP's government in Scotland, and I appreciate you're the Westminster leader, but obviously I want to talk to you about it.
See, this is what happened on the debate last night.
Yeah.
You've fallen into the trap.
Yeah, I have fallen for it, Stephen, I'm sorry. Drug deaths. So I've been up there, I've made films about it. Me and my colleague Ed, it's a really, really serious issue. And I look at some of the measures that have been, I would say the Scottish government and the British government has been brought sort of kicking and screaming towards, whether it's consumption rooms, and I would probably look to go one step further and think about sort of decriminalising the process for a lot of those very, very disadvantaged people that I don't think being persecuted by the police particularly helps. So I'd sort of invite you, first of all, to sort of talk about that issue and how you think the best way for us to address it is.
Yeah, look, for a wee bit of context, I grew up across Dundee and Brecon, but I spent a lot of time in my youth in Dundee, and as I grew up, you've seen a lot of folk of similar age, a wee bit older, who were taking hard drugs. You didn't have to go very far to see someone sitting outside with a spoon and a needle. It was pretty bleak at certain points. And obviously, as we've all got older, the consequences of that has been pretty stark, and the numbers are terrifying. And we all, I mean, I know multiple people who've lost very close family members as a result of the crisis that we face. And it's something that, you know, it's something the government has obviously prioritised. They've put significant amount of investment into trying to rehab and to provide rehab for people. It's about early intervention. That's what matters most to me in the initial term, particularly where it's cyclical for some families and some individuals. Being able to break down the barriers of why someone gets themselves in a position where they feel that they feel that the only out that they have is to go and take drugs, and obviously the spiral of trying to find something stronger to deal with the challenges that are perhaps happening in their life. A lot of that's linked to poverty. A lot of that's linked to the disadvantage that exists within our communities, and the fact that society's not worked for generations in that regard. And we need to address that head on. We can't shy away from it. I think in around the safe drug consumption rooms, we cut a loan for a while in relation to that. There was a lot of work done by a chap in the Central Belt, and I hope I'm getting his name right here. It was Peter Craib.
Yeah, met him.
And you know, he was a strong advocate for safe drug consumption rooms. Politically, we pushed that. We've now got the UK government into a position where it's not going to stop it happening. So hopefully that can be one tool in the armoury to try and deal with people who've already got the addiction, so that they're at least taking drugs in a safe environment, so we don't have some of the terrible tragedies that we have had. Of course, there's that wider discussion about decriminalisation. Do you treat this as a criminal matter or a public health matter? I personally see it as a public health matter, and I also see it as something which we need to address in the wider social and economic aspect of poverty, because people are taking drugs for a reason, and they're taking it in the main because of the environment within which they live, and that's a failure of society to deal with people's environment around them. And the only way you can break that cycle is to break the cycle of poverty and to eradicate it, and that's a much bigger challenge.
Yeah, for viewers, the piece we made is called Deaths of Despair, and we interviewed Peter. He got an old ambulance basically, and sort of parked up in Glasgow, and he has naloxone and is trained in administering it, which is a drug that kind of it's basically like an adrenaline shot, Pulp Fiction, right? It's like if you have an overdose, you jam it in someone and you can reverse the effects of it. Great guy. And one of the things that really struck me in that piece is kind of it sounds bizarre because it's so abstract, but it was a sort of a lost sense of pride and self-worth. And we interviewed a chap who wasn't a drug user, but he'd had an accident at work. He couldn't work anymore, and he was on benefits, and we were talking to him. He was from, I think he was from Pollock, and we were sort of saying, why do you think these issues affect Glasgow and Scotland more broadly? And he just said, it was so confronting. He was like, what's the first thing someone asks you if they ask you your name? So what do you do? And when you say nothing, where does that leave you? Your sense of self, your sense of self-worth, your sense of pride. And when that collapses, all of a sudden, that sort of cycle of self-destruction, of possibly self-loathing, of escapism becomes all the more powerful.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, I get that resonates. And for a lot of folk, say living in poverty, that's a cycle that's been there for generations. And the welfare state doesn't operate in the way that it should at the moment. It's not a safety net in the way it should be. The pressure that's put on people to do things which is not necessary, which is driven, of course, by the populist right-wing dogma that if someone's not working, they need to be forced back in, irrespective of the personal challenges that they're facing, and the cycle that creates behind it, where people then just detach themselves completely from the system, it's not great. And you know, that's where the government needs to make sure that there's the requisite funding there to provide not just the services that people need to do, like what Peter's started out with doing with safe consumption rooms and like, but that early intervention that I was talking about, particularly with young folk who grow up not seeing hope and opportunity, but just see despair. And until you can break that cycle, you're going to have repeated problems. And unfortunately, Scotland's got massive issues with us, for sure.
Speaking of populist right-wing dogma, a certain politician has returned.
I wonder where you're going with that.
Yeah, can you figure it out? He's back. Nigel Farage, formerly the honorary president of Reform, now its leader as of yesterday.
And its owner.
Yes, majority shareholder in chief.
Yeah.
Do you think Reform's going to be a big factor in this election?
It looks like it might be in England. It won't be in Scotland. I'll not cut through in Scotland. I mean, Scotland's not voted Tory since 1955. It's hardly a way to swing to the right and back, or swing even further right and back Farage and what's the guy's name? Tice as well. I mean, it's worrying though, isn't it? It's seriously worrying, because it's almost as if, like, the wall-to-wall coverage, which has basically existed for the last 48 hours over this guy who's lost, 7 elections, and who has views which are pretty repugnant, is just bizarre. And, his brand of politics and the way he treats people and the way he speaks about people is not something that I will ever be able to understand. I think it's quite dangerous. I think we run the risk in the UK of very much tracking that route which the sort of centre-right went down in the States with Trump. Someone like Farage would love that. Liz Truss has obviously gone down that route. Braverman's gone down that route. Generic as well. They're obviously making an educated guess that this is something that's going to give them a bit of credence. And that rise of populism, we need to be willing to take it head on. We can't just shy away. You can't just be like, oh yeah, well, in order to soften the blow, what we'll do is we'll also speak ill of migrants, and we'll say that we don't want this to happen, or we'll be silent on our relationship with the European Union, or let's not talk about taxation. Let's make sure we bring taxes down irrespective of the damage it does to our NHS, and we'll open the door to privatisation a wee bit. No, that's not how you deal with populism. You take it head on and you say, these are our principles, this is the right thing to do, and that's why we're going to argue these points, and we're going to take it to the public, and we're going to be compelling about it, and we're going to offer them hope and optimism for the future, rather than just trying to scapegoat others and create this fictional society which just won't work. And that's the challenge that faces all political parties of the centre, but certainly those like ourselves of the centre-left, to be able to take that head on, and to not cow to the populist dogma that exists.
Yeah, I agree and disagree with some of what you've said there. On the point about his inclusion and the sort of media coverage around him, I think it's justified, because I think he is the most consequential politician in the UK since Thatcher.
Really?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Even more consequential than the politicians who nearly brought Scotland its independence.
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. Because you're right, he's lost 7 seats. Right, he won a pretty big referendum, the consequences of which are going to reach far into the future. And I almost think actually that his significance is almost amplified by the fact that he did it without a seat in Parliament.
So on Brexit, right? So this is the thing which has annoyed me probably the most of the last 48 hours, is that this guy's been getting significant coverage, but nobody's been saying, hold on a minute, Brexit's been a total disaster, like an unmitigated disaster. And like in Scotland, we voted to remain within the European Union. Like, he didn't win. Like, he lost in Scotland, and he lost handsomely in Scotland, which makes this even more frustrating. And the reality is that the centre and the centre-left in UK politics lost that election. Nigel Farage didn't win it because they weren't bold enough and they weren't brave enough, particularly some of the biggest figures on the left wing weren't bold enough and brave enough to say that this is the future and this is what should be happening. We need European integration because it makes sense for the economy, for jobs, for combating climate change and all of that.
Labour leadership's heart wasn't in that, though.
No, of course it wasn't.
Renowned Brexiteer, well, not Brexiteer, but a Lexiteer, shall we say.
And you can compare that with Scotland, where our heart wasn't it, and we were fully behind the campaign to remain within the European Union, and we won handsomely. And if there was a vote about rejoining the European Union in Scotland, I think the last opinion poll had it 70% of people would want to go back in, because we've made the positive arguments about why it matters, and everyone recognises, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, whether you're a business or a social care provider, you understand the consequences of Brexit. And it's almost like it's not talked about. I've not seen anything from the Tories or the Labour Party.
They're going to make Brexit work, Stephen.
What a load of nonsense.
Yeah.
But they've not mentioned it once during this campaign yet, and it is still lingering there. So it may well be the case that the UK left the European Union, but that was because the argument was lost willingly by others, rather than taking it head on and saying this is the right thing. People were squeamish about it.
This, for me, is the most dangerous thing, basically, about Keir Starmer. Because what you're saying, right, about making a positive argument, creating a movement, projecting a positive vision for the country, and ideally, quite possibly with some form of ideological underpinning for it as well, would be quite good. And whether you're a socialist, a free market libertarian, if I look at you and go, I understand the ideas behind I understand the political philosophy behind the policy that you're advocating for. I disagree with it. Mm-hmm. Here are my critiques of it, but I can engage with you on a substantive level. And one of the things that I think is most worrying, even though you're looking at, like we said, 150, 200 seat majority for the Labour Party, is that one, by neglecting your base of traditionally progressive people in the UK, when you get to looking for a second term, you're in a very dangerous position at that point, I think. But similarly, and Starmer was doing it today, saying that Rishi Sunak is too liberal on immigration. That's, I've paraphrased, but he used the word liberal. He said Sunak was too liberal on immigration. I don't think you can ever, you can't feed that dragon forever. Eventually it will eat you. Do you know, Keir Starmer will never be racist enough for the racist voters that certain elements of the Tory party and certain elements of reform pander to. Mm-hmm. And if you don't make a positive vision, this guy, all he has to do with, let's say, Farage and Reform as an example, if he has like a pretty extensive house building policy, there are tons of young people who will just hold their nose and say, I don't like what he says about Muslims. I don't like what he says about our European friends. But I am not going to wait until I'm 36 to buy a house. Mm-hmm. So here we go, it's reform. And I think that's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the examples there already at the moment with Sunak, because Sunak has tried to appease the right wing of the Tory party, but he's never been able to get them on side. He's never been able to convince Truss, and he's never going to be able to convince her, but he's never been able to get Braverman and Jenrick and some of the other folk on the really right wing of the Conservative Party, because he's tried to do just exactly what you're saying there, whether it's with Rwanda or whether it's with some of the other mad stuff he's put forward. He's tried to tack right, but they will always go further, and that's where Starmer at the moment needs to make sure that he stops and he says, no, this is what I believe in, this is who I am. And he's not doing that, and he's not done that his entire leadership. Before he became leader, was it 2020 when he was saying we need to make the progressive case for why migrants matter to the UK.
Maintaining freedom of movement.
Yeah, maintaining freedom of movement. We need to make sure that people know that they contribute more to society than they take out, that the foundations of our NHS, our social care system and our businesses are people coming to live and work here. And within a couple of years, he's standing on the telly saying we need to put caps on this and we need to reduce it. And where's the hope and the optimism there? And you're right, he's never going to be able to please these people, because no matter what he does, they will always pitch further and further right. But as he chases them, he takes his own party and he takes the UK not from the centre left, but to the centre and then to the centre right and then beyond. And that's not good enough. And that's where, like, for me, sitting here in Scotland, watching it going, I don't want to be a part of this. Surely we can do something bigger and better and be part of a positive European future, which is outward looking, which says we want people to come and live and work here, and develop the new technologies of tomorrow, so we can get on and battle the climate crisis and deal with all the challenges that we face. And that's now is the time for politicians to stand up and be counted and say, these are our principles, these are our values. And I think the public are longing for that. And we were talking about the polls earlier on. There was, I'm sure within one of them yesterday, was the bit that a lot of the public would love another choice. They would love another choice. In Scotland, they're fortunate we have that choice, which is John Swinney and the SNP. We plug. Just swiftly.
Right the plug.
See how good that was done.
Yeah.
I've been waiting that entire interview to do that.
Seamless.
But there is that third option, which doesn't exist in vast swathes of England.
Lib Dems?
But apart from potentially for some people now, which is going to be Farage, and that's scary. So yeah, I would just urge all politicians at the moment to make sure that they're standing up for what it is they believe in, and it's easier said than done.
Got to have something to believe in as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Don't know if you saw this, but just before we sort of came on air, Farage is in Clacton and he got milkshaked.
I heard he's a fan. What flavour was it?
It looked like a banana.
Was that a wonky banana flavour or just like?
I don't know if it was a straight banana or not. By the way you're joking about it, my question to you was going to be: is it appropriate for a politician to be milkshaked like that? Like, how do you feel about it?
Okay, so joking aside, no, it's not okay.
Yeah.
And all that does is going to galvanise the people who think that he should be given a fair hearing. You beat Nigel Farage on the arguments. You don't beat him by throwing stuff at him. I mean, it's funny and we can laugh and joke about it and all the rest, but we're grown-ups in a pretty serious time. This is a guy who feeds on uncertainty, feeds on the fact that people are suffering at the moment because they're skint because of the cost of living crisis, and they want to go and buy a home and they can't, and all the other pressures that are on them. Don't give them the energy. Don't give them what they want. Fight them on the arguments, fight them on the policies, and be confident about that, and go to the public with those things.
Will you be fighting him on the arguments on Friday, leaders debate?
I don't know who's covering that yet for the SNP.
Could you be?
I don't know.
Might get a phone call.
I'll find out.
Yeah.
I know John's got a pretty hectic diary because the Scottish Parliament's still going. He's
head of the government.
Yeah, he's the head of the government. So trying to squeeze in all these debates and around his existing commitments and the campaign trail and all the rest of it. But we'll make sure that there's someone there.
If you are there and you are against him, you'll beat him on the arguments. You think you'll beat him on the arguments?
Of course, yeah. And I'll be pretty clear on what I'm saying, and I won't hold back because I'm not worried by Nigel Farage or anyone else. I mean, sitting on a question time panel with Jordan Peterson, who's like Nigel Farage on stilts, doesn't bother me because I know what I believe in, and it's why I got involved in politics. I want to make things better for people. I don't want to make scapegoats of people as folk like Farage do.
Stephen Flynn, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
Cheers, man.
Really
Thanks.
appreciate it.
I thought you were going to ask me who's going to win the Euros.
It's not Scotland.
Definitely Scotland.